The cold hit Amelia before the reality did. -15 degrees. Blizzard warnings screaming from every weather alert in Chicago. Yet here she stood on her own front porch, locked out, watching through frosted windows as Dominic's silhouette disappeared deeper into the house. Their house, without looking back. For a moment, the snow-covered street went completely silent. Amelia looked down at her trembling hands, at the thin coat that was never meant for this kind of cold, at the wedding ring that suddenly felt like a shackle rather than a promise. The man who'd just thrown her into sub-zero temperatures to die, her husband Dominic Robin, the man who'd stolen 5 years of her life. "You're useless to me," his words still echoed from behind that locked door. "Get out before I call the police." Dominic had no idea who she'd been before him. No idea about the woman who'd left someone precious behind to marry him, the one who'd abandoned a man who truly loved her for Dominic's promises of forever, who'd sacrificed a real connection for what turned out to be a beautiful lie. No idea about the ex-boyfriend she'd broken 6 years ago. No idea about the phone in her pocket with a contact she hadn't called in all that time, a name that still made her heart skip despite everything. And Dominic definitely had no idea about the man whose number she was now scrolling to with numb, desperate fingers, the man whose voice she was about to hear for the first time in 6 years, the man who'd become something entirely different since she'd left him. Leon Page, her first love, Seoul's most dangerous underground king. As Amelia's frozen fingers pressed call and Leon's deeper, more commanding voice answered immediately, "Amelia?" She felt something shift in the freezing air. Dominic had just made the worst mistake of his life. And in approximately 10 minutes, when Leon's black Mercedes G-Wagon pulled up to this snow-buried street, when he emerged from that vehicle sharper and more powerful than the man she remembered, Dominic Robin was going to learn something about the woman he'd just discarded. About the man she'd loved before him. About consequences that would expose everything Dominic had hidden. But Dominic didn't know it yet. Right now, in this moment, behind that locked door, he still thought she was broken. Still thought she was the problem. Still thought he held all the power. That was about to change. Before we dive deeper into this story of betrayal, rescue, and redemption, I want to thank you for being here. Your support means everything to me. Do me a favor, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful stories of love, justice, and second chances. Now, let's get into this emotional journey. 6 years ago, Amelia Robin believed in fairy tales. She was 21, fresh out of Northwestern with her business degree still warm in her hands and a marketing job that made her mother cry with pride. The corporate networking event at the Peninsula Hotel wasn't where she expected to meet her future husband, but Dominic Robin had a way of making the impossible feel inevitable. He was 33, towering over the crowd with the kind of confidence that came from building 3 successful auto repair shops from nothing. When he approached her at the cocktail bar, his opening line wasn't smooth or rehearsed. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," he'd said, and something about his honesty made Amelia laugh for the first time all evening. The courtship was a whirlwind that left her breathless. Flowers arrived at her office every Friday without fail, not roses, but sunflowers, because he'd remembered her mentioning they reminded her of summer. Weekend trips to Michigan's wine country where they'd talk until the sun came up, sharing dreams that felt too big to say out loud to anyone else. Dominic spoke about legacy, about building something that mattered, about finding a partner who understood that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Amelia had never felt so seen, so chosen, so certain that this was what love was supposed to feel like. 18 months later, they were married at the Chicago Botanic Garden under a canopy of white roses and string lights, 200 guests bearing witness to what everyone agreed was the beginning of something extraordinary. Amelia's father had walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Dominic's vows had promised forever in a voice that didn't waver once. When they'd kissed as husband and wife, Amelia had thought, "This is it. This is the moment my real life begins." The 4-bedroom house in Oak Park came next, with its tree-lined street and neighbors who threw block parties every summer. Dominic had carried Amelia over the threshold, both of them laughing, and when he'd set her down in the empty living room, he'd spun her in a slow circle. "This is ours," he'd whispered against her hair. "Every room, every possibility, everything we're going to build together." 3 bedrooms sat empty, waiting. Not for long, they'd promised each other. Soon they'd be filled with cribs and toys and the beautiful chaos of the family they'd create. 1 year into their marriage, on a quiet Sunday morning with coffee growing cold on the nightstand, Amelia had turned to Dominic with a question that felt like stepping off a cliff. What if we started trying for a baby? Dominic's face had transformed, joy flooding his features in a way that made Amelia's heart squeeze. He'd pulled her close, his hand already moving to rest on her flat stomach with a tenderness that spoke of futures he was already imagining. We'll build something beautiful together, he'd promised, kissing her forehead with reverence that felt like a vow. You, me, and the family we're going to create. This is just the beginning, Em. Our real story starts now. Amelia had believed him completely. She had no way of knowing that in that moment, full of hope and promise and absolute certainty, she was standing at the edge of a cliff that would take 5 years to hit the bottom of. No way of knowing that the man kissing her forehead would one day be the same man locking her out in a blizzard to freeze. No way of knowing that beautiful was a word that would eventually choke her. But that morning, wrapped in Dominic's arms with sunlight streaming through their bedroom window, Amelia Robin believed in fairy tales. What Amelia didn't know was that fairy tales, even the beautiful ones, have a way of revealing their monsters slowly. And the trying, the hope that felt so pure that Sunday morning, would become the very weapon used to destroy her. The hope that had felt so pure that Sunday morning had a shelf life of exactly 14 months. By their second anniversary, Amelia knew her cycle better than she knew her own reflection. Day 1 meant the start of tracking. Day 12 meant ovulation strips turning positive, which meant texting Dominic to come home early, which meant intimacy that had stopped feeling like connection and started feeling like assignment. Day 28 meant staring at a pregnancy test, breath held, praying for 2 lines that never appeared. Then day 1 came again, and the cycle repeated, and repeated, and repeated until Amelia couldn't remember what sex felt like when it wasn't scheduled. The doctor's appointments became routine. Dr. Chen's office on Michigan Avenue with its 2 cheerful waiting room full of pregnancy magazines that felt like mockery. Blood draws every month to check hormone levels. Ultrasounds to confirm her ovaries were functioning. Temperature charts that looked like mountain ranges of hope and disappointment. Dominic accompanied her to every appointment in those early years, sitting in the sterile exam rooms, holding her hand through uncomfortable procedures, nodding seriously when Dr. Chen suggested they remain patient. These things take time for some couples, the doctor had said with practiced gentleness. Your bodies are both healthy. Sometimes it's just a matter of persistence. Persistence. As if wanting something badly enough could will it into existence. By year 3, their bedroom had transformed into a laboratory. The nightstand drawer held ovulation predictor kits, basal thermometers, pre-seed lubricant that the internet forums swore by, and a collection of pregnancy tests Amelia bought in bulk because hope was cheaper by the dozen. Their intimate moments were dictated by apps that pinged notifications. High fertility window, try tonight. Romance had become scheduled. Spontaneity had become extinct. And every month when Amelia's period arrived, it felt like a small death, mourning a child who'd never existed, a future that remained perpetually out of reach. Dominic was patient through most of it. When Amelia cried after another negative test, he held her on the bathroom floor, his voice steady even when hers shattered. We're in this together, he'd whisper into her hair. We'll figure this out. We're a team. But cracks were forming, hairline fractures in the foundation they'd built. Month 37 brought the breaking point. Amelia had been so certain that cycle, her body had felt different, her breasts tender, a metallic taste in her mouth that the forums said was a pregnancy sign. She'd taken the test 3 days early, unable to wait, hands shaking as she set the timer. When the single line appeared, negative, again, always, something inside her shattered completely. Dominic found her 20 minutes later, still sitting on the bathroom floor, the test clutched in her hand like evidence of her failure. He'd knelt beside her, pulled her into his arms, but when she'd looked up at his face, she'd seen something new there. Something that looked like exhaustion. Like resignation. He'd said softly, and there was an edge in his voice that hadn't been there before. Maybe we should try the specialists your doctor recommended. The fertility clinic. We can't keep doing this forever. We can't keep doing this forever. The words hung between them like a verdict. Not, we'll get through this, or, we're in this together. But we can't keep doing this forever, as if there was an expiration date on his patience, a timer counting down on how long he'd wait for her body to cooperate. Amelia had nodded, unable to speak, and wondered when exactly hope had transformed into obligation. When trying for a baby had stopped being about love and started being about endurance. What Amelia didn't know was that the cracks forming in their foundation were about to become chasms. And the patience Dominic had shown for 3 years was about to run out in the worst possible way, at a family gathering that would poison everything they had left. The cracks that had been forming became chasms in Patricia Robin's kitchen on a humid Atlanta evening in July. Dominic's family had insisted on hosting them for their 5th anniversary, a week-long gathering that Amelia had dreaded from the moment the invitation arrived. His mother Patricia had always maintained a polite distance, the kind of coolness that never quite thawed no matter how many hostess gifts Amelia brought or compliments she offered. His sisters Michelle and Donna had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, observations that sounded sweet but left wounds. But family was family, and Dominic had wanted to celebrate 5 years with the people who'd raised him. The first 3 days passed with surface-level pleasantries. Conversations about the weather, comments about Amelia's hair, questions about Dominic's business that never extended to asking about Amelia's marketing career. She'd felt like a guest in their world rather than family, but she'd smiled through it, determined to build bridges with these women who'd never fully accepted her. The 4th evening, everything changed. Dominic had gone out with his father and uncles to a sports bar, leaving Amelia alone with the women. She'd offered to help with dishes after dinner, standing at Patricia's sink with sudsy hands, trying once again to find common ground. That's when the whispers became weapons. 5 years and not even one pregnancy scare, Michelle said, her voice carrying that particular tone of faux concern that barely masked judgment. That's not normal, Amelia. Have you actually been trying? Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks. Of course we have. These things take time for some couples. Patricia set down her dish towel with deliberate slowness, and something in that gesture made Amelia's stomach drop. My son was very fertile in his previous relationships, she said, each word precise as a scalpel. Very healthy. Strong genes in this family. My mother had 6 children, I had 4, my sisters all have big families. This problem didn't come from our side. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Donna leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her expression almost pitying. Maybe there's something wrong with you, Amelia. Have you had your tubes checked? Your hormone levels? Women with career ambitions sometimes have these problems, all that stress, always putting work first. That's not fair, Amelia protested, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. What's not fair, Patricia continued, her voice sharp as broken glass, is my son being denied the family he deserves because you can't give him children. Dominic comes from a line of strong, fertile women. He could have married anyone. He chose you, and you can't even give him the one thing that matters. The conversation escalated from there. Suggestions that maybe Dominic should explore his options. Pointed comments about women who trap successful men, only to disappoint them when it counts. Implications that Amelia was selfish, defective, stealing Dominic's chance at the legacy he deserved. By the time Dominic returned home that night, Amelia was upstairs in their guest room, tears dried but heart shattered into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. She'd tried to tell him what happened, but he was 3 beers deep and nostalgic from his evening out. They mean well, he'd said dismissively, already half asleep. You know how mothers are about grandchildren. But over the next 3 days, Amelia noticed something that made her blood run cold. Dominic in quiet conversations with Patricia in corners of the house. Michelle pulling him aside on the porch, her voice low but her glances in Amelia's direction unmistakable. Donna showing him something on her phone that made his jaw tighten. By the time they boarded the plane back to Chicago, something fundamental had shifted in the way Dominic looked at his wife. The warmth had drained from his eyes, replaced by something that looked like resentment. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time and didn't like what he saw. The poison had been planted. And it was already spreading through the roots of their marriage. What Amelia didn't know was that Patricia's poison would transform Dominic from patient husband into cruel stranger. And the descent that began in that Atlanta kitchen would end with Amelia standing in a blizzard, locked out of her own home, with nowhere left to turn. The poison Patricia planted in Atlanta took 6 months to fully metastasize, transforming Dominic from the man who'd promised, "We're in this together," into someone Amelia barely recognized. It started small. "Did you take your vitamins today? Or did you forget again?" He'd ask over breakfast, his tone suggesting her forgetfulness was the reason they remained childless. "Maybe if you stressed less about work and focused more on your health, things would be different." By month 7, the comments became weapons. Fertility clinic brochures appeared on the kitchen counter, always open to sections highlighting female factor infertility. Dominic would leave them there without comment, but the message was clear. This is your fault. You are the problem. The bedroom became a war zone. Intimacy only happened during her fertile window, and even then it felt mechanical, joyless. On other nights when Amelia would reach for him, seeking comfort, he'd shift away with disgust barely concealed. "I'm tired," he'd say, turning his back. Or worse, "What's the point?" He started coming home later, claiming emergencies at the shops. When he finally walked through the door at 9 or 10, Amelia could smell perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers. She never asked. Fear had become her constant companion. The breaking point came on a cold November night. Dominic came home drunk, whiskey on his breath, eyes glassy with rage. He stumbled into the living room where Amelia sat reading. "You've brought nothing but bad luck into my life," he slurred, words thick and cruel. "Everything was perfect before you. Now look at me, nearly 40 with no legacy, no heir. What was the point of all this success if I have no one to pass it to?" "Dominic, this isn't just my fault. I don't need test results to tell me what I already know," he interrupted, slamming his glass down. "There's nothing wrong with me. The problem is you, Amelia. It's always been you." After that night, Amelia moved through her own home like a ghost, hyper-aware of every action. She burned dinner once and listened to a 20-minute lecture about her inadequacy. She forgot his dry cleaning and heard about it for days. She tried to talk about her feelings and was told she was being dramatic. Her best friend Jasmine noticed the change over coffee one Saturday. The weight loss, the dark circles, the anxious phone checking. "Leave him, Jasmine said urgently. "This isn't love. This is abuse." But where would she go? And somewhere deep down, Amelia still remembered the man Dominic had been. She kept hoping that man would return. What Amelia didn't know was that the man she'd married was gone forever. And on a freezing December night, Dominic would prove just how far he'd fallen, by throwing her into a blizzard and locking the door behind her. If you're feeling the weight of Amelia's story, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this journey gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue. The hope that Dominic might return had died completely by the time December arrived with its brutal cold. Chicago winters were unforgiving, but this particular storm was the kind meteorologists warned about with urgent voices. Blizzard warnings blared from every phone. Wind chill values plummeted to -15 degrees. Stay inside unless absolutely necessary. Frostbite in minutes. Hypothermia in less than 30. Death if exposure continued. Amelia had taken the day off work, feeling unusually exhausted. She'd spent the afternoon organizing their home office while snow piled against the windows. As evening approached, she'd made Dominic's favorite meal, braised short ribs with garlic mashed potatoes, hoping a good dinner might ease the constant tension. Dominic came home at 7:30, and Amelia heard the mood before she saw him. The slammed door, the heavy footsteps. She arranged his plate with trembling hands. "How was your day?" she asked softly. Dominic stared at the plate, then at her. "The Oak Park shop lost a major client today. I'm sorry. What happened? What happened?" His voice rose sharply. "What happened is I'm distracted. I can't focus because I come home to this." He gestured with disgust. "This empty house. This empty life. No children. No future. Just you and your excuses. Dominic, that's not fair." "Fair?" He stood abruptly. "Is it fair that I'm almost 40 with no legacy? Is it fair that I gave you everything and you can't give me the one thing that matters?" "We don't know." "I know." His voice thundered, and Amelia flinched. "You're the problem, Amelia. You've always been the problem. The argument escalated, years of resentment exploding. Dominic paced like a caged animal, listing every failure. Then he said it. Get out. Amelia froze. What? Get out of my house. I don't want to look at you anymore. You're useless to me. Dominic, it's below zero outside. There's a blizzard. I don't care. He grabbed her coat and threw it at her. Get out. Now. Before I call the police. The cruelty in his eyes told her he meant it. With shaking hands, she put on her coat, grabbed her purse and phone. She didn't think to pack anything, she just needed to get out before his rage turned physical. The cold hit her like a physical assault. Snow swirled violently. The street was deserted. Behind her, the door slammed. The deadbolt clicked. Amelia stood in the freezing darkness, her marriage dead behind that locked door, and realized her husband had just sentenced her to death. What Amelia didn't know was that the phone call she was about to make would save her life, but it would also resurrect a past she'd buried 6 years ago. A past that had transformed into something far more dangerous than the man she'd left behind. The past Amelia had buried was about to save her life, and she had no idea how much it had changed. Standing on that frozen porch, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone. Her first thought was Jasmine, but her friend was in Milwaukee for a work conference. Her second thought was a hotel, but the rideshare app showed estimated wait time, 45 to 60 minutes. In this cold, that could be fatal. Then, scrolling through contacts with numb fingers, Amelia saw a name she hadn't called in 6 years. Leon Page, her ex-boyfriend, the one she'd left when she met Dominic. The one who'd called her repeatedly after their breakup, wanting another chance, until she'd eventually stopped answering and he'd finally stopped trying. She had no right to call him now. No right to ask for help after 6 years of silence. But as the wind cut through her coat and her fingers began losing sensation, Amelia realized she had no other choice. The phone rang 3 times before his voice came through, deeper than she remembered but unmistakable. Amelia? She couldn't speak at first, her teeth chattering too violently. Amelia? Is that you? Are you okay? Leon, she managed. I'm sorry, I know I have no right to call you, but I need help. I'm in trouble. Where are you? She gave him her address, expecting questions, expecting him to tell her to call someone else. Instead, he simply said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Get somewhere less exposed if you can. Amelia huddled in the alcove of her porch, trying to shield herself from the worst of the wind. True to his word, exactly 9 minutes later, a black Mercedes G-Wagon pulled up to the curb. Leon emerged from the driver's side, and even through the snow and darkness, Amelia could see how much he'd changed. He'd always been handsome, sharp Korean features, expressive eyes, athletic build. But the man approaching her porch moved with a different kind of confidence now. Dangerous. Powerful. He wore an expensive black coat, designer shoes that had no business in this weather, and when he got close enough, Amelia saw a thin scar running along his left jawline that hadn't been there before. Jesus Christ, Amelia, Leon said, immediately removing his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. How long have you been out here? Maybe 15 minutes? He guided her to his vehicle, one hand on her back, and she felt the warmth radiating from him even through her clothes. Inside the car, heat blasted from the vents. Leon cranked it higher, then reached into the back seat and produced a blanket, which he tucked around her with careful precision. What happened? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Amelia couldn't look at him. My husband kicked me out. She felt more than saw Leon's reaction. The way his hands tightened on the steering wheel, the muscle that twitched in his jaw. But he didn't press for details. Instead, he put the car in drive and pulled away from the house that had been her prison. You're coming to my place, Leon said. It wasn't a question. We'll get you warm, get some food in you, and then you can tell me what's going on. If you want to. The drive to Leon's penthouse in River North took 20 minutes through the snow-choked streets. Amelia spent most of it in silence, her mind still reeling. Occasionally, she'd glance at Leon's profile, noting the changes 6 years had brought. He'd filled out more, his shoulders broader. His hands on the wheel were adorned with expensive rings. And there was something in the way he carried himself, a hardness that hadn't been there when they dated. You've done well for yourself, Amelia said quietly, her voice still shaky from the cold. Leon's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. Things changed after you left. What Amelia didn't know was just how much Leon had changed. The legitimate businessman she'd left behind had transformed into something else entirely, something dangerous, powerful, and completely devoted to protecting the woman he'd never stopped loving. The dangerous, powerful man Leon had become still knew how to offer gentleness when it mattered most. His penthouse was stunning in a way that made Amelia realize just how much had changed in 6 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, city lights twinkling through the falling snow like stars. Modern furniture that screamed wealth, leather sofas, abstract artwork that Amelia suspected was original rather than prints, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. Leon guided her straight to the master bathroom without ceremony. He started the shower, adjusting the temperature until steam filled the space, then produced a set of expensive loungewear from a closet that held more designer clothes than Amelia had seen outside a department store. "Take as long as you need," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll make something to eat." Under the hot water, Amelia finally allowed herself to break down. Sobs racked her body as the events of the past months, the past years, crashed over her. She'd failed at her marriage. She'd allowed herself to be diminished, blamed, cast out into the cold. What kind of person had she become? When had she stopped recognizing herself? The breakdown lasted until the water started running cold. When she finally emerged, dressed in Leon's clothes that smelled like his expensive cologne, she found him in the kitchen. He'd prepared soup and fresh bread, and had opened a bottle of wine. "Sit," he commanded gently, and Amelia obeyed. As she ate, warmth finally returning to her body, Amelia found herself telling Leon everything. The fertility struggles that had consumed 5 years. The hopeful beginning that had transformed into clinical obligation. Dominic's family poisoning him against her in Atlanta. The gradual descent from patient husband to cruel critic. The comments that became weapons. The fear that had become her constant companion. And finally, tonight's brutal ending in the snow. Leon listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix things. He just listened with an intensity that made Amelia feel truly heard for the first time in years. When she finished, her voice hoarse from talking, Leon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You'll stay here as long as you need," he said finally. "I have 3 guest rooms, take your pick. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the practical stuff. But tonight, you're safe." "Leon, I can't just." "Yes, you can." His voice was firm but not unkind. 6 years ago, you chose him over me. I respected that choice even though it broke my heart. But you didn't deserve what he did to you. Nobody does. Amelia felt fresh tears threatening. "I'm sorry. For how I ended things between us. For calling you out of nowhere after all this time. Don't." Leon's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "The past is the past, Amelia. Right now, in this moment, all that matters is that you're safe." That night, lying in a guest room that was nicer than most luxury hotels, Amelia finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. Wasn't walking on eggshells. Wasn't bracing for the next verbal attack. She was simply safe. And in the room down the hall, Leon sat in his home office, making phone calls in Korean with a voice that had gone cold and dangerous, learning everything there was to know about Dominic Robin. What Amelia didn't know was that Leon's gentleness toward her existed alongside a ruthlessness toward those who hurt her. And as she slept peacefully for the first time in years, Leon was already planning exactly how to ensure Dominic would never threaten her again. The Leon who'd rescued Amelia from the snow was not the man she'd left 6 years ago, and the truth of his transformation revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals. 6 years earlier, when Amelia had chosen Dominic over him, Leon Page had been heartbroken and angry in equal measure. He'd been 26, working in commercial real estate with dreams of building his own development company. Legitimate, safe. The kind of future you could explain at family dinners without uncomfortable silences. But heartbreak has a way of making dangerous offers look appealing. His uncle had called him 3 weeks after Amelia stopped answering his texts. Uncle Jin ran what he called an import-export business, with real estate holdings throughout the Midwest. Leon had kept him at arm's length his entire life, knowing the family whispers about what Uncle Jin's business really involved. "Come work for me," Uncle Jin had said over soju in a Koreatown restaurant. "Use that business degree for something that actually matters. Stop playing it safe." Leon had been drinking, nursing wounds that wouldn't heal, and had said yes to spite the ghost of the woman who'd left him. That first yes had led to a second, then a third, until Leon was too deep to climb out even if he'd wanted to. He'd proven himself more capable than anyone expected. He had a mind for strategy, a talent for negotiation, and when necessary, a willingness to do what needed to be done. The commercial real estate knowledge became useful, identifying properties for money laundering, setting up legitimate fronts. Import-export turned into moving high-end stolen vehicles across state lines. Protection services for Korean businesses became enforcement when payments came late. When Uncle Jin was killed in a territorial dispute with a Russian crew 3 years ago, it was Leon who stepped up, consolidated power, and emerged as the new boss. Not through violence. Leon had learned that brutality was inefficient, but through intelligence and strategic partnerships that made him more valuable alive than dead. At 32, Leon controlled an empire worth hundreds of millions. Legitimate real estate holdings, restaurants, investment portfolios funded the less legal operations, car theft rings that moved luxury vehicles to overseas markets, underground gambling that catered to Chicago's elite, strategic partnerships with other organizations that kept the peace and kept business flowing. Amelia began noticing the signs during her second week in his penthouse. Late-night phone calls where Leon would step onto the balcony, speaking rapid Korean with a voice that had gone cold and authoritative. Men in expensive suits arriving for meetings in his home office, their conversations hushed but their deference to Leon unmistakable. The envelope of cash she'd accidentally seen in his desk drawer when looking for a pen, stacks of hundreds wrapped in rubber bands. The defining moment came on her 10th night there. Amelia had woken at 2 a.m., thirsty, and found Leon in his office with the door cracked. He was speaking Korean, but even without understanding the words, she recognized the tone. Command, authority, the kind of voice that didn't expect to be questioned. When he'd finished the call and found her standing in the hallway, something had passed between them. An acknowledgement that they both knew she'd heard something she wasn't supposed to. "Things changed after you left," Leon had said simply, and in those 5 words, Amelia understood that the legitimate businessman she'd once known had transformed into something else entirely. Something dangerous, something powerful, something that operated in shadows she'd never had to navigate before. She should have been afraid. Should have questioned whether staying with him was safe. But as Leon looked at her with eyes that still held the warmth of the man who'd rescued her from the snow, Amelia realized something unexpected. She felt safer here, in the home of a crime boss, than she'd ever felt in her own marriage. What Amelia didn't know was that Leon's transformation into Chicago's underground king would become both her protection and her complication. Because the feelings beginning to stir between them weren't just echoes of the past, they were something new, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. We're at a critical turning point in Amelia's journey. If this story is resonating with you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These moments of healing and transformation are what make this story so powerful, and I don't want you to miss what comes next. Now, let's continue. The feelings beginning to stir between them weren't just echoes of the past. They were something new, deeper, forged in the fire of everything they'd both survived. Over the following week, Amelia recovered both physically and emotionally. She'd called in sick to work, not ready to face questions about her situation or explain the absence of her wedding ring, which she'd quietly slipped off and left in the guest room drawer. Leon was surprisingly attentive in ways that felt effortless rather than performative. He'd check in between his business meetings, sitting with her to watch movies in comfortable silence. He ensured she ate properly, cooking simple meals that somehow tasted better than anything she'd had in years. The more time they spent together, the more Amelia saw glimpses of the Leon she'd once loved, now matured and deepened by whatever experiences had shaped him these past 6 years. He was more confident, more self-assured. And when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken despite everything she was going through. The shift happened on the 8th night. They'd been sharing a bottle of wine on his couch, reminiscing about their college years, laughing about professors they'd hated and parties they'd survived. The conversation had turned more serious, more intimate, and Amelia found herself closer to Leon than she'd been, studying the scar on his jawline. "How did you get this?" she asked, reaching up to trace the line with her finger. Leon caught her hand, holding it against his face, and his dark eyes met hers with an intensity that stole her breath. A disagreement that got physical. "It's not as dramatic a story as the scar suggests. You've changed," Amelia whispered. "So have you." Leon's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You're stronger than you think, Amelia. Stronger than he made you feel." The kiss, when it happened, felt inevitable. Years of unresolved feelings, current vulnerability, and genuine connection all culminated in that moment. Amelia knew it was complicated, knew she was technically still married, knew her emotions were raw and potentially unreliable. But being in Leon's arms felt like coming home after years of being lost. That night, they became intimate in Leon's bed, and it was nothing like the clinical, joyless encounters Amelia had endured with Dominic. This was emotional reconnection, comfort, and a reclamation of self-worth that Dominic had systematically destroyed. Leon touched her like she was precious, like every inch of her body deserved reverence. He looked at her like she was beautiful, desirable, worthy of worship. "You're so beautiful," Leon whispered against her skin, and Amelia realized with a shock that she believed him. For the first time in years, she felt desired, valued, seen. Afterward, lying in Leon's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Amelia felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was: peace. Leon's fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with words. "I never stopped loving you," Leon said quietly, and the confession hung in the air between them like a truth too big to ignore. Amelia lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes that contradicted the dangerous man he'd become. "I never stopped thinking about you," she admitted. "Even when I was trying to make it work with Dominic. Even when I thought I'd made the right choice. You were always there, in the back of my mind." What neither of them knew was that their rekindled connection had already created consequences neither was prepared for. Because in 3 weeks, Amelia would discover she was pregnant. And the timeline would make it impossible to know if the father was her cruel husband or her protective lover. The consequences neither of them had prepared for announced themselves on a Tuesday morning with nausea that wouldn't quit. Amelia woke feeling sick, a sensation she initially attributed to the rich pasta Leon had cooked the night before. But when the nausea continued the next day and the day after that, accompanied by exhaustion that felt bone-deep and breasts that were suddenly tender to the touch, a different possibility emerged. No, it couldn't be. 5 years of trying. 5 years of negative tests. 5 years of being told she was the problem, broken, defective. It couldn't be that simple. It couldn't be now. "I need to go to the pharmacy," she told Leon on the 4th morning, her voice carefully neutral. He looked up from his coffee, immediately concerned. "Are you feeling worse? I can have someone deliver whatever you need." "No, I'll go." She couldn't explain why she needed to do this alone. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was the desperate need to know before involving anyone else in what might be nothing. The pregnancy test aisle at Walgreens felt like judgment. Amelia grabbed 3 different brands with shaking hands, paid cash, and drove back to Leon's penthouse with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. The first test was positive. She took another one. Positive. And another. Positive. Sitting on the bathroom floor of Leon's guest room, surrounded by 3 positive pregnancy tests, Amelia felt the room spin. She was pregnant. After 5 years of trying, after being blamed and shamed and cast out, she was finally pregnant. But with whose child? The timeline was impossible to parse. Her last period had been roughly 6 weeks ago. She'd slept with Dominic irregularly in the months before he kicked her out, their intimacy sporadic and joyless, but it had happened. She'd been with Leon for 3 weeks. The conception could have happened with either man. The cruelty of the irony wasn't lost on Amelia. She'd been deemed broken, defective, blamed for the absence of children. Now she was pregnant and had no idea who the father was. When she emerged from the bathroom, Leon immediately noticed something was wrong. "Amelia?" What happened? She couldn't speak, just handed him one of the positive tests. Leon stared at it, then at her, processing. You're pregnant. I don't know if it's yours, Amelia said quickly, the words tumbling out. The timing, it could be Dominic's. We were intimate occasionally before he kicked me out. Or it could be yours. I don't know, Leon. I don't know. She expected anger, or at minimum confusion. Instead, Leon set down the test and pulled Amelia into his arms. Okay, he said simply. We'll figure this out. How can you be so calm? It's a disaster. I'm still technically married. I don't know who the father is. This is exactly the kind of mess that Amelia. Leon tilted her face up to meet his eyes. Whatever happens, whatever we find out, you're not alone in this. Understand? His certainty should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because certainty meant commitment, and commitment meant decisions Amelia wasn't ready to make. What if the baby was Dominic's? Would she have to tell him? Would he demand custody, trap her back in that toxic marriage for the sake of the child he'd claimed to want so desperately? What if the baby was Leon's? Could she bring a child into his dangerous world? The late-night phone calls, the men in expensive suits, the envelope of cash. This wasn't a normal life to offer a child. I need to know, Amelia whispered. I need to know whose baby this is. Leon's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. Eventually, we will. But right now, in this moment, all that matters is that you're healthy and safe. The rest we'll handle when we need to. What Amelia didn't know was that the answer to her paternity question would come sooner than expected, but not from a test. It would come from a hospital phone call that would reveal the truth about Dominic's infection, inverting everything she'd believed about the past 5 years and giving her the vindication she'd never thought she'd receive. The answer to Amelia's paternity question would come sooner than expected, but not in the way she'd imagined, and it would invert everything she'd believed about the past 5 years. 2 weeks passed in a haze of uncertainty. Leon had suggested she speak with a doctor, potentially get a paternity test, but Amelia resisted. Knowing the truth meant facing consequences she wasn't prepared for. What if the baby was Dominic's? Would she have to tell him? Would he use the pregnancy as proof that she'd been the problem all along, that she'd finally conceived only after he'd driven her to such desperation? The decision about what to do was taken out of her hands when her phone rang with an unknown number one Tuesday afternoon. Ms. Robin, a professional female voice inquired. This is Dr. Patel from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I'm calling regarding your husband, Dominic Robin. Amelia's heart stopped. Is he okay? He's stable, but he was admitted to our emergency department 2 days ago with severe testicular pain and fever. During examination, we discovered a serious infection that required immediate treatment. We've been trying to reach you. You're listed as his emergency contact. The doctor continued explaining the medical situation, but Amelia's mind was reeling. An infection. A serious infection in his reproductive organs. Dr. Patel, Amelia interrupted, her voice shaking. This infection, how long would he have had it? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Based on our testing and Mr. Robin's symptoms, this appears to be a chronic condition that's likely been present for quite some time. Possibly years. We're running additional tests to determine the exact pathogen and extent of the damage. Amelia's hand tightened on the phone. Would this infection affect fertility? Another pause. Potentially, yes. Chronic infections in the male reproductive system can significantly impact sperm production and quality. Mr. Robin is being seen by our urology team for a full fertility assessment as part of his treatment plan. After ending the call, Amelia sat in stunned silence. Dominic had an infection, a chronic infection that had likely been present throughout their entire marriage. All those years of blame, of accusations, of being told she was defective, broken, the reason they couldn't conceive, and it had been him all along. The fury that rose in Amelia was white-hot and all-consuming. The emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the cruelty of kicking her out in sub-zero temperatures, all of it built on a lie. A lie Dominic had been too arrogant, too proud, too convinced of his own perfection to ever question. Leon found her on the couch, staring at nothing, her hands clenched into fists. What happened? He asked, immediately concerned. Amelia told him everything, the hospital call, the infection, the revelation that Dominic had been the reason for their infertility all along. As she spoke, she watched Leon's expression shift from concern to understanding to cold, controlled anger. "That son of a bitch," Leon said quietly. "He blamed you, made you feel worthless, cast you out. And the whole time it was him." Amelia laughed, but there was no humor in it. 5 years, Leon. 5 years of being told I was broken. Of medical procedures and judgmental doctors and his family's accusations. And he had a fucking infection. The vindication should have felt sweet. Instead, it felt like rage. 5 years of her life stolen. 5 years of self-worth systematically destroyed. 5 years of walking on eggshells and accepting blame for something that had never been her fault. Leon moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "Are you going to tell him that you're pregnant?" Amelia considered the question. Part of her wanted to march into that hospital and throw the truth in Dominic's face. Watch him realize that she'd conceived a child, possibly his child, only after he'd destroyed their marriage. Let him sit with that irony. But another part of her recognized that Dominic had no claim to her anymore. "No," Amelia said finally. "Whether this baby is biologically his or yours, Dominic gave up any claim to fatherhood when he kicked me out. He wanted me gone, so I'm gone." What Amelia didn't know was that her decision to choose Leon and walk away from Dominic would give her something she'd never had in her marriage: the freedom to build a family based on love rather than blame, on choice rather than biology, on genuine connection rather than toxic expectations. We've reached the final chapter of Amelia's incredible journey. If this story has touched your heart, moved you, or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means the world. Now, let's finish this powerful journey together. The freedom to build a family based on love rather than blame would become Amelia's greatest gift, one she'd never experienced in her marriage but would fight to give her child. Over the following days, Amelia processed the revelation about Dominic's infection with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The anger remained, but it had transformed into something more productive: determination. Determination to never again allow someone to make her feel less than. Determination to build a future on truth rather than lies. Determination to ensure the child growing inside her never experienced the kind of blame and shame she'd endured. Leon had been patient through her processing, giving her space when she needed it, offering comfort when she didn't. But the question remained, hanging between them like unfinished business: what would they do about the pregnancy? One evening, as they sat on his balcony watching the Chicago skyline light up against the darkness, Amelia finally voiced the decision she'd been forming. "I'm not going to tell him," she said quietly. "About the baby." Leon turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "You're certain? Whether this baby is biologically his or yours, Dominic gave up any claim to fatherhood when he kicked me out into that blizzard. He wanted me gone, so I'm gone. He doesn't get to know about this child. He doesn't get to use this pregnancy to validate his cruelty or claim some kind of vindication." Leon was quiet for a moment, then reached for her hand. "And us? What do we do?" Amelia turned to face him fully, really looking at this man who'd saved her, sheltered her, reminded her that she deserved love and respect. Yes, his world was complicated and potentially dangerous. Yes, there were 1,000 reasons why building a future together was risky. But Leon had shown her more genuine care in 6 weeks than Dominic had in 5 years. "I want to make this work," Amelia said softly. "With you. Whatever we find out about paternity, I want to try. If you're willing." Leon's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made Amelia's heart squeeze. "I've been waiting 6 years for you to come back to me, Amelia. I'm not letting you go again. Even with all this messiness? Even if the baby is Dominic's? Especially then." Leon's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Because biology is just biology, family is what you build. This child will grow up knowing they're loved. By you. By me. They'll never know what it feels like to be blamed or diminished or made to feel worthless. We'll make sure of that." For the first time since seeing those positive pregnancy tests, Amelia felt hope bloom in her chest. Her life was still complicated. She'd still need to file for divorce, navigate the legal complexities of her separation from Dominic, make decisions about her career and future. But she wouldn't be doing any of it alone. As Leon pulled her into his arms, Amelia realized that sometimes life's cruelest moments lead to unexpected salvation. She'd been thrown into the freezing snow, cast out and broken. But that moment of abandonment had led her to warmth, to rediscovered love, and to a future that, while uncertain, held genuine promise of happiness. The child growing inside her, regardless of paternity, would never know what it felt like to be blamed for existing. Would never be told they were the problem. Would never walk on eggshells in their own home. Amelia would make sure of that. She'd endured that treatment so her child wouldn't have to. And in that moment, surrounded by Leon's warmth and strength, looking out over the city where she'd almost died but had instead found new life, Amelia finally felt what she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was enough exactly as she was. The future was uncertain. Paternity remained a question. Legal battles loomed. But for the first time in 5 years, Amelia Robin wasn't afraid. She was free. And she was choosing, actively choosing, to build a family based on love rather than obligation, on safety rather than fear, on genuine connection rather than toxic expectations. She was choosing herself. She was choosing Leon. She was choosing the possibility of happiness over the certainty of misery. And that choice made all the difference. Thank you for joining me on Amelia's journey from darkness to light, from abuse to empowerment, from worthlessness to worth. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that they deserve better. Remember, you are enough exactly as you are. Until next time.